Sammy he's the same age as my son. So he's a lovely, lovely brother.
Thank you.
Sammy Awad.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's so great to be here today. Let me start by first congratulating the women here for International Women's Day. And I will ask one last time, can I go to the meeting with Lynn? No? Still? Okay. This morning we had a breakfast meeting at 7, and I left at 8 for another meeting, and Munther stopped me as I was leaving the breakfast table, and he said, "Oh, Sammy, this is what I would like for you to talk about today." Just a couple of hours ago. And I took what he said to heart, and he asked me to share stories and experiences of nonviolence. But I'm not going to share many stories. I'm going to share one story. The story that I know best, which is my story. I don't want to talk about other people's experiences and engagement, even though many, many, many Palestinians and Israelis are engaging in nonviolence. The only story I am sure of in mind and heart and spirit can only be mine. So the title that you see is called Nonviolence in your booklets, and I have just added a few words to that title. The title that I would like to share with you today is called Transforming Hearts Through Nonviolence. As many of you know, I come from a family that has endured tremendous suffering and tremendous pain. At the same time, a family that has truly experienced healing and forgiveness, specifically to those who did this to us. And on Women's Day, I remember a woman named Huda Awad, my grandmother, who led this family in this process. A woman who was filled with the Spirit of God and planted in her young children at her early age and her 19 grandchildren in her old age, the seeds of compassion, care, peace, love, and harmony. But my personal journey was not easy, because in that family that I was living in that environment of faith, I also did not grow up in a bubble, and I do not live in a bubble now, isolated from the injustices and the violence that I see around me. I am not ignoring and isolated from the pain that I saw and continue to see on a daily basis. The pain of seeing a woman cry, rolling on the ground, pulling her hair as she hears the news that her son was just killed. The pain of seeing children walking around dazed and confused in a mass of people looking for their father, not knowing that what these people were there doing was burying their father who was just killed. The pain of looking through the rubbish and rumbling of a demolished home with a little girl who's looking for the arm and leg of her Barbie doll that she used to sleep with every night. The pain of an old village woman hugging an olive tree that was just uprooted, an olive tree that was planted years ago by a very young child that she called grandfather. This pain is real. From a young age, I grew up, as should be, as must be, in anger. You cannot remain silent, at least internally, when you see such violence. And I challenged everything around me. Who is the God, who is the Jesus of my father that he talks about? Who is the God that would allow for this to be? What family I am part of that talks one way when reality is 180 degrees the other way? But my beautiful family never argued with me. They never pushed me. They never forced me into believing anything, never tried to convince me of anything they believed in. But the seed was planted. And the seed grew a little bit when I was 12 years old. That famous knock came, the knock on one's heart. A knock from a man named Jesus. A man that I grew up as a Christian knowing, beautiful stories in the Bible, fairy tales even. The Superman that walked on water. I want to be like Jesus. I dreamt of walking on water one day. But now, Jesus was not a story. Jesus was real. And he simply said to me, Sammy, just open the door. Don't worry. Just open the door and let me in. And for some crazy reason, I trusted that voice and I said yes. In accepting Christ in me, I thought that was it, like many people. Now it's the easy life ahead of me. Smooth sailing to the kingdom of God, to heaven. I just have to pray and believe and continue to stay in that spirit, and then everything will be okay. I was a member of the club now, a member of the church, an elitist. That was not it. It was the beginning of a difficult and challenging journey. But a journey that I was not engaged in alone. A journey included carrying my cross and the cross of my people. And it took me some time, it took me years to begin to realize what that means. And I can say to you with full confidence that I'm still in the first steps of this process. Something else happened at age 12. An uncle of mine who had been living in the US returned to Jerusalem. My uncle Mubarak, who is with us, I don't know where he is, here he is. Hi, Ammu. A guy that I give the credit and the blame for everything that has me to do with nonviolence. He opened a center in Jerusalem called the Palestinian Center for the Study of Nonviolence. And I began to see a place where I can practice my anger, release my anger. And in a sense, it was following the teachings of my family, the teachings of the Bible, where I am not violent towards the other, because for me that was very clear. And it was during that time that I met a different image of the Israelis that I had been knowing growing up. And like you hear many Palestinians say, when we grew up, and the sad reality even today, when my daughters are growing up, the only image they have of Israelis are soldiers and settlers. But then I met the good Israelis, the ones who were with us, the ones who were on our side, the ones who stood with us, who fought with us, who were nonviolent with us, and I loved them. And for me, that said, that justifies everything. But there was still a divide. There was still the us and the them. In 1988, my uncle was arrested. he was put on trial, and he was deported specifically because of his work in nonviolence. And for me, that was a big question to ask: what is not allowing the Israelis to see how beneficial nonviolence is? I fully understood then, and fully understand now, if Palestinians engage in violence, that there will be a reaction. It may be violent reaction. But what was in nonviolence that scared the Israeli government so much that they accused this guy of being a threat to the national security of Israel? And it was at that time, at 16, that I said, I want to find out. And I committed my life to studying and engaging in nonviolence. A few months later, my father and my mother saw me becoming a little bit too much involved than what I should be as a 16-year-old, and decided to kick me and my younger brother out of the country. And we ended up in the United States, where I studied political science and did my undergraduate degree in peace and conflict resolution, where, of course, when you go to America, like many of us, you learn how to resolve everything through steps. The 7 steps of dieting, the 7 steps of leadership building, the 7 steps of peacemaking, and of course the most famous book, The 7 Steps to Salvation. And I came back here fully excited because now I know it. I know it. Resolving conflicts, the 7 steps, I learned them. I have a master's degree in this. And I came back and started Holy Land Trust in 1998. There are 2 reasons why I started the organization. One is a political reason, and one is a religious reason. The religious reason was because we were approaching, in 1996, something 4 years upcoming, which was the Millennium Celebration, the birth of Christ in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago. Now, you know, if you talk to Palestinians, beginning to even talk about something 4 years before it happens is like 20 years. So when we had our friends Robin and Nancy Wainwright come from the US in '96 and talk about the millennium, 4 years from now, just wait till we get there, we'll do something then. But their idea and their vision was so beautiful that I decided to begin working with them that early on. And their idea was to do a reenactment of the journey of the Magi, the whole trip, from Iran all the way to Bethlehem, where the old Persian Empire was. The short story is that it was a success. Christians from all around the world walked unarmed, unaccompanied by soldiers or bodyguards, walking and riding camels for 99 days in Iraq, in Syria, in Jordan, and crossing into the West Bank to celebrate the birth of Christ. Meeting and interacting and praying with the local Muslim communities in these areas. Given little prayers on pieces of paper by the Iraqi Muslims saying, when you go to Bethlehem, to where Jesus was born, please put this prayer in the grotto. These are Muslims asking Christian pilgrims, white American Christian pilgrims, pray for us when you go to Bethlehem. The second reason for starting Holy Land Trust was a reality. The reality that a peace process that had been going on for so many years was failing. And I don't want to go too much into the details, but I will simply say that the reality we lived in of a failed peace process was because leaders were negotiating and people were being divided from each other. And for me, the idea of starting Holy Land Trust, strengthening the community for the future, is to ask the question, what can we do to strengthen the communities, plural, Palestinian and Israeli communities, to build a better future, to look at the challenges that face us now and say, we can build a better future for the Holy Land, a land that we all call holy. And of course, as a person committed to nonviolence, I became very quickly very active in nonviolence, especially in the year 2000 when the whole peace process collapsed. And I began to engage in political activism, direct actions, protests. And of course, that was not easy because there was so much violence and so much bloodshed and so much terrorism happening and so much killing happening. And I was rejected by everybody. I had Palestinians accuse me of being a collaborator, of being a Mossad agent, of being a CIA agent. And I had Israelis threatening to arrest me, threatening to arrest our people, being detained, being questioned by them all the time, always attempting to legitimize us even within our own community. But if you're rejected by everybody, that means you're doing what Jesus is asking you to do, right? That's what I thought. I'm following his teachings. Nobody likes me. This must be what Jesus is all about. And I kept convincing myself of that. Yes, I'm physically not hurting the other. I am not violent. But at the same time, I really want to make them look bad. I really want to expose them. I really want to show the world how evil they are to me and my people. In a sense, what I was doing was in the process that I was being demonized and dehumanized by the Israeli, I was actually doing the same thing. But added to that was an ego trip called, I'm a peace activist. I am non-violent. I would say statements like, yeah, I'm non-violent, I'm committed to non-violence, but if somebody else wants to choose violence, that's their choice. They could do that. And I won't criticize it, because we are in the same struggle for liberating Palestine. I would suggest to them a better approach, I would suggest to them a better tactic of engaging, but ultimately, this is different. This is nonviolence, this is armed resistance, violence. It's two different tactics and approaches that they are open to engage in. And in reality, this is expected human behavior. I mean, this is strategic thinking. What are the best approaches to end injustice and occupation and war and all of this, the just war theories. But slowly, I began to realize, very simply, that this is not Jesus. This is not what Jesus is about. And for me to realize that, yes, at one point I opened my heart and let Jesus in, but something happened in here where Jesus kind of stepped out, or maybe was pushed out without me knowing, out of my heart. He was still around, you know, maybe sitting on a garden bench right outside my heart, leg on leg, just waiting for me to wake up again. So he never ever left. And maybe once in a while I would open the window from my heart and look outside, and yeah, he's still around. He's hovering around. I'm fine. I'm not in too bad of a shape. But there is a difference in Jesus being around or being fully engulfed in every cell of my body. Then he knocked again. A gentle, soft knock, without judgment, without accusation, as if it was knocking for the first time. And he said, Sammy, open up. I'm here again. And the knock came through the Sermon on the Mount, through reading Matthew 5. At a time when I felt that it was very important for me as a Christian to read the Bible again And I'm reading through the Bible, flipping through it, the Sermon on the Mount. I'm all have this memorized, blessed are the blessed are. Okay. So I'm reading through it, and then I froze with this knock on my heart. Had to turn back, and those 3 words popped up: love your enemy, Sammy. I'm calling you, I'm commanding you, I'm ordering you as your king, as your father, as your God, to love your enemy. And that took me on an incredible process. What does Jesus mean to me as a Palestinian living in this situation to love my enemy? And it's a commandment. There is no question about it. It's not open to debate and discussion like we like to do with everything else Jesus says. Love your enemy. Not consider it, not think about it, not I would like for you to. Love your enemy. And then, what is this love? Like you said, Ron, do I go to a checkpoint now? A group of Israeli soldiers standing at the container checkpoint. I get out of my car. Habibi, come on. You know it. Give me some lovin'. Give me some lovin', brother. There's 2 places I might end up. Either in prison or the nearest loony hospital. That's it. If not 6 feet under as well. Loving the enemy means to see the enemy. How can you love somebody without knowing them? To get to know them even beyond how they know themselves. Probably like Rana, my wife, knows me now, more than I know myself. That is an expression of love. To get to be with them, to get to interact with them, to be in their pain, to be in their sorrow, to be in their joy. Because you could sign a peace agreement with somebody, you could sign a contract with somebody, but at the end of the day, you each go your separate ways. And that's fine in the world that we live in. People do that all the time. Nations do that all the time, sign peace agreements. We have one between Jordan and Israel. We have one between Israel and Egypt. Signed peace agreements where they have their guns pointing towards each other but not shooting at each other because we have a peace agreement and there's a benefit. There's an economic benefit, there's a social benefit. Of course, economically, the US is pumping billions of dollars just to maintain the agreement. And we call it peace. That's not what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is talking about oneness, complete oneness with the enemy. You never leave someone you love. You actually want to be with them continuously. You think about them all the time. You dream of them all the time. You pray for them all the time. You grieve in their pain and celebrate their joys with them. The next knock on the door came when Jesus said, I want you to engage in pilgrimage. Dude, I'm in the Holy Land. What do you mean pilgrimage? Like, no, I want you to go on a pilgrimage, Sammy. I want you to go to a place called Auschwitz. I want you to visit a death camp called Birkenau. This is the pilgrimage you will engage in. And I went. And I saw and experienced as close as I possibly can the reality of what happened in the Holocaust. And I was shocked. We know about the Holocaust. We heard about it. I saw Schindler's List, other movies, but it never was real to me. And I began to see the enemy who I was to love, what their history is, where they came from, what is their pain. Yes, Israel talks about security, security, security. 99% of the language that Israel engages in courts when Palestinians are accused of anything, when land is being confiscated, when walls are being built, it's always about security, 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 because it's the macho term to use. What is behind security? fear. There is deep fear in the Jewish community globally, but also in Israeli society specifically. Has my nonviolence addressed that fear or not? Or was it just about me, my rights, my justice, my freedom? That's where Jesus comes in. A greater understanding of nonviolence came to me when I visited even a community in Portugal that we are connected with, where nonviolence was also not just the political thing to do. Nonviolence was social. Nonviolence was environmental. What are we doing to the environment? Nonviolence was energy, resources. Nonviolence was social structures, family structures. How can I claim to be nonviolent towards the occupation when I go home after a long day and my daughter comes to hug me and I say, move away, I'm tired, I don't want to see anybody? If I cannot engage in full love and nonviolence with my children, I should not even have the honor of engaging with my enemy in nonviolence. To understand that nonviolence is words like greed, like jealousy, like judgment, like control, and so many other feelings and expressions that are violent. To listen to somebody like Bob Roberts, who said a statement once that has been continuously in my mind as a Christian, to say that I serve not to convert, but I serve because I am converted. Thank you, Bob, for that. We're always trying to seek people. I got one, I got one, I got one. And then we get upset when we don't. Serve because you are a follower of Jesus. And you be a means to create that space where Jesus knocks on their heart. For me to reach a point where I say nonviolence is not just an option, it is and must be the only option, and I'm ready to stand in the face of every person, Palestinian or Israeli, who engages in nonviolence and say this is wrong. There is no excuse, there is no justification, there is no way you could say you had to use violence in this situation. And this is not easy for us, believe me, because people are looking at us. They're always looking to criticize us. Yes, we need to be strong. If I'm a follower of Jesus, there is no room for any form of violence to be used against anyone. But at the same time, to be fully loving and to be fully supportive and to be a teacher and an example of even the most violent of what we call terrorists, and say, yes, there is space for you for transformation and healing. Because the Palestinian who uses violence or the Israeli who uses violence is not made genetically by God to use violence against somebody else. There are stories, there are narratives, there are experiences that we all have felt where we feel there is no other option for me but to use this. And all we have to do is just say, yes, there is. There is another way. And like Gandhi said that he has never found any issue in his life where he does not see a nonviolent option. But if he engages in violence, then it comes out of weakness, being at the deepest, weakest point of my life possible that will make me engage in violence. It's not out of strength, not out of courage, not out of power, but out of weakness that I use violence. To understand that nonviolence is not just physical, it's not just verbal, but nonviolence is also what happens in my heart and my mind. And how many of us are violent in our thoughts towards others? We stand in front of them and we smile and we shake our heads, but what's happening in here? I can't wait till this guy gets out of here. This is so boring. Why are you doing this to me? I hate him. I just hate him. But I have to do this because I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm a Christian. I have to look good in front of him. It was beautiful seeing the panelists yesterday. They were disagreeing with love in their hearts towards each other. It was amazing. Nobody was wanting to look good in front of the other. Nobody was changing what they believe in to appease even the audience that was there. We have a saying in Arabic called tabyid wajh. This is what we're famous at. Tabyid wajh means having a white face. You always want to have a white face in front of other people. Look good in front of other people. But guess what? You're not the only one who is reading your own thoughts. Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said to them, "Why do you think evil in your hearts? What are you thinking?" And try this just as an experiment. Next time you're standing with somebody you don't like, and you don't want to be honest with them and tell you, "Look, these things you do I don't like about you," and you start having these thoughts, just remember, try to remember in those moments that somebody else is also reading my thoughts. His name is God, the Great One. And just see what happens to you then. Just try it. But if you are able to succeed in trying it once, try to make it a practice in your life. That every time you have a negative thought about somebody, about something, about a people, about an ethnic group, just say, God is also reading my thoughts. What we are about, what we should be about, is a process of transformation and healing. This is what nonviolence is about. For me, this is what Jesus was about. He came to heal the past. He came to heal the pain of the past and transform the people into a new reality, into a new community, into a new kingdom, but not change the reality, not revolutionize the reality, but transform. Transformation means everything is actually still the same. The only thing changed is the hearts and minds of people. I want to quickly go over points that I feel are very important because there has to be, how do we practice this? How do we practice a teaching of Jesus that calls for transformation and healing in the context that we are in? The first thing is nonviolence cannot be a one-thing issue. Nonviolence cannot be a political issue. I look at South Africa where people used nonviolence to resist apartheid, and I look at South Africa now, and believe me, the lives of the majority of the blacks in South Africa are not better off than what they were then. And they used nonviolence because it was a specific, targeted campaign to end apartheid. Yes, it was one person, one vote, but transformation and healing at a complete level never took place. I was meeting with 30 African American pastors last week in my office, and we talked about this issue. And they said, that's what was missing for us. It was about civil rights, it's about rights to vote, it was about rights to ride in the bus and to sit where we ever wanted to sit and to drink from whatever fountain we wanted to drink. But the life of the African American in the US now, yeah, it's better at certain levels, but racism still continues. Discrimination still continues. No healing and transformation has took place there. Do I see the wall of separation around me in Bethlehem? I see it every day. Does this wall need to come down? It definitely needs to come down. But I also understand what Jesus is telling me, that it's not just about the concrete cement wall. It is about the walls of fear, the walls of mistrust, the walls of hatred that exist in you and in them that need to be broken first, maybe, before the walls of concrete fall down. Do I see Jerusalem as the holy city for all, where every man and woman has the right, unconditional, unrestricted right to go and pray in Jerusalem whenever he wanted, without needing a permit, to pray in their holy sites, to be a united city for peace globally? Yes. But Jesus says there's more than that. I will give you this when I see Jews Christians and Muslims, stop looking and blaming each other for everything and begin to look at me as the one great creator of all of them, and they worship me and they surrender this land to me. They surrender the city to me, and this is part of the process as well. Do I see the right of return to the refugees to their homes, the Palestinian refugees? I say yes as well. Yes, the refugees have the right to return to their homes. But it is not just that. The right of return of the refugees to their homes is the right when we engage in what Jesus says, which is really being peacemakers at the level where the right of return will be when I see signs in Hebrew written at the borders in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, written by Israelis, telling the refugees, welcome back home. We've been waiting for you. We love you, and this is your home, and we can live as neighbors with each other in peace and tranquility and love. And we no longer fear you. We actually want you to return to your homes, and we want to be your neighbors. And the Palestinians will say, yes, this is exactly what we also want. Is it impossible? Of course. But you know what? That's Jesus. Jesus is all about making the impossible possible. And that's only what we have to believe. I want to conclude by sharing what this title means to me. Christ at the Checkpoint. Very controversial title. The title alone has been put down by so many people. And I just want to explain what Christ at the Checkpoint means to me. When people read this, an immediate assumption happens that, including us, that Christ is standing with the oppressed, waiting at the checkpoint. That Christ is the person you saw this morning, one of 500 or 1,000 people that were waiting in line for 2 hours to cross the checkpoint to go to his work. That Christ is found in the woman who is standing at the checkpoint wanting to go to get her medical treatment in a hospital. That Christ is the student who has to agonize every single day to cross the checkpoint to get his education. But you know what? If we have Christ fully embodied in every cell of our body, we'll also see Christ at a checkpoint in somebody else. We'll see Christ in the 18-year-old soldier who's carrying the gun and pointing to that working man. And we'll see Christ in that 20-year-old woman who just had a fight with her boyfriend and has to do this job at the checkpoint because she might lose her college tuition that's paid for by the government if she stands there, and she hates being there, making sure this woman is sick and give her the right to cross the checkpoint. Christ at the checkpoint means Christ is standing for the dream and for the life and for the salvation of every person at the checkpoint, if it was Israeli or Palestinian. God bless you.